program. The Water Ambassador Program is a partnership program between Martin County and the University of Florida IFAS Extension Florida Sea Grant. And its intent is to educate the Martin County residents and the general public in order to promote clean water through understanding our impacts, especially in regards to our stormwater. And with that, we're really excited to introduce our new Martin County partner with us today, Dr. Elizabeth Kelly. So she is responsible for managing the Water Ambassador Program through Martin County, and we thought it would be apt that she be our first presenter to kick off our 2023 webinar series. So we have a great lineup to start off the 2023 series. We have next week, we're actually doing back-to-back presentations. Next week, we have our colleague at the University of Florida IFAS Extension is going to be talking about rain barrels. This was actually a presentation request we got a few times last year, so we're happy to be able to bring it to you. Then we're going to talk about a new study that was done by our University of Florida colleagues, understanding the efficacy of those fertilizer ordinances on water quality in Florida lakes. In April, we have a colleague from Florida Institute of Technology talking about using sargassum algae to hopefully new innovative technology to reduce harmful algal blooms. And then in May, we have Rachel Harris from the Loxahatchee River District talking about potential drivers of seagrass decline in the Loxahatchee. So we will be putting all the registration links in the chat as we get started, so just bear with us. We are also really excited to announce for our first webinar that we also have our first field trip scheduled. So our first field trip is scheduled for March 3rd from 10 to 12 p.m. And Greg Braun, who was our presenter last year talking about the Loxalucy Headwaters Project, is actually going to be leading a tour of some of the Headwaters Initiative projects. So we will be meeting at Kitchen Creek Preserve and then visiting a couple of the project locations that were recently purchased. Registration is required for that, so you can either go to the link or that QR code will take you directly to the registration link. And we will also put that registration link in the chat for you, and we hope to see you all there. This is our first webinar for 2023, so we don't have any 23 recordings up, but we do have all recordings from the previous Water Ambassador webinar series posted on the Martin County Sea Grant Extension website. That is a crazy long link, so we will put it in the chat, or you can just Google Martin County Sea Grant, and that will bring up all of the Water Ambassador webinars. We are also hoping to get a YouTube page started, so look out for that later in the year. And we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation, but feel free as you think of them to put them in the chat function, and then we will address them once Dr. Kelly is done. So with that, I am super excited to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Kelly to you. Elizabeth is the Environmental Programs Coordinator at the Martin County Department of Public Works Division of Ecosystem Restoration and Management. She is a water quality scientist specializing in environmental microbiology of recreational waters and urban ecology and restoration. Dr. Kelly's research focuses on water quality in freshwater, coastal, and estuarine environments, specifically involving the study of fecal indicator bacteria, cyanobacteria or blue-green algae, and nutrients. Dr. Kelly is a graduate of the University of Miami. She has interned with NOAA and USGS. She's also collaborated with the Florida Coastal Everglades Long-Term Ecosystem Restoration Program. She has managed municipal contracts for water quality, spoken at commissioning meetings, worked in community outreach and education, and has really worked to provide public policy on best management practices. And now Elizabeth can add Water Ambassador to her fantastic resume, and we are super excited to be working with her on this project. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kelly to bring us back to basics for this Water Ambassador program and provide an introduction to stormwater.
Thank you very much. I am trying to switch over here to my presentation. There we are. And basically, the way that Lisa was explaining is exactly what it is. We're going to go back to the basics of this and do an introduction to stormwater. So let's see, overall, basically, what is stormwater? Stormwater is water that flows over the land. It's during and immediately after a rain event. It is absorbed into the ground and is filtered, and it does replenish our aquifers and flows into streams and rivers. It does not necessarily flow into a wastewater treatment system. There definitely are some combined ones, but it doesn't necessarily flow into a treatment system and generally goes directly into our surface water. In Martin County, the stormwater system consists of gutters and storm drains, pipes, open channels, culverts, and creeks. The stormwater discharges into the St. Lucie River and the estuary, and also into the Southern Indian River Lagoon. An important part of stormwater is what we do on the land. Our land use affects water quality, and that in turn affects environmental health and human health. Sometimes you may see it looked at in one way or the other, that we're just looking at environmental health. We think about animals and what happens to water quality, algae-wise and things like that. But we also need to consider that there is what affects the environment also affects humans. The environmental health is rivers, creeks, estuaries, lagoons, those pollution, and that's obviously not a good habitat for animals. But for people, not only is it that it's not good to have the water polluted that we fish from, the fisheries, obviously, if we're eating the fish from there, but also our opportunities for recreation. When it comes to things like blue-green algae or sometimes red tide, it's considerably a problem simply to try to breathe around polluted water. You can have all sorts of respiratory illnesses from it. You could also, if it depends on cyanobacteria, there have been some cases that might possibly connect that to disorders, neurological disorders such as ALS, and other neurodegenerative such diseases like that. So it's not simply just being able to fish or to even breathe near the water, opportunities for recreation, but everything you do, whether or not you're actually swimming, you're drinking it or you're splashing in it or you're eating the fish from it, that also affects human health as well as simply the health of the environment. So a lot of what we try to do is to improve stormwater discharges, and this has been a long history of trying to do such a thing. This started in 1972 with the Clean Water Act, which focused simply on point source pollution. We're going to get into that a little bit later to discuss, but a point source is generally, most of these have been eliminated, specifically exactly where it comes from, which factory, which wastewater treatment facility, things like that. In 1990, we began with NPDES, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, and this is a permitting process. It addresses non-point sources of pollution, where we try to look at what might be polluting it, particularly in issues of stormwater, and how we can affect some of these concerns. This is, of course, as I was explaining, the difference between a point source and a non-point source. A point source comes from one point, and that can be the publicly owned treatment works. It can be industrial process wastewater factories, runoff that comes through a specific storm sewer system. And then if we have animal feeding operations, which obviously somewhat around the lake, we have maybe toward more the north end, we do have these animal feeding operations. So this is one place where they know exactly where this is coming from. A non-point source is when it doesn't really come from any particular source, but from many sources. And things we need to consider is that, you might have heard picking up after your dog, fecal bacteria from dog waste. And obviously it's not just dogs, this is also a wildlife concern. So any animal that goes to the bathroom out in nature, they are contributing to this. If we can pick up after our pets, though, it is certainly very helpful. Nutrients from the fertilizer that we put into our lawns to make them grow, it also helps to make algae grow. So we need to be careful about that. Herbicides and pesticides, we think we're keeping it under control with the pests that might be living in there, the invasive weeds, or some insects that we don't want there. But overuse of that can also cause pollution in the environment. Forever chemicals has been a recent concern where they're in a lot of products that we use, and we need to be careful about how we're using them. Car oil is also another one. If you change your car's oil, if your car is running out on the street and it happens to leak. And then of course the basic thing you might consider trash or litter, where it blows around, it comes out of trash cans, people throw it on the street, hopefully they don't, but it doesn't necessarily come from any one particular source. Our stormwater program makes Martin County responsible for enforcing stormwater pollution prevention requirements. So we have an active role in the reduction of pollution and in the protection of both the health of humans and the health of the environment. Some of the prohibitions of our local ordinances is that you are not allowed to discharge material into the storm drainage system other than stormwater. And we also look for illicit connections, which includes the construction, use, or maintenance of an illicit connection. Some of the effects of poor stormwater management includes flooding downstream, stream bank erosion, increased turbidity. Now we're going to get into this a little bit more, but turbidity means when the water is cloudy, and that means that not only can be caused by sediment, like you can get a lot of sediment in the stream, it can also come from other chemicals that may add to particles. It's suspended particles floating in the water, and that can cause the cloudiness, but that's what turbidity is. Habitat destruction, of course, for the animals. Infrastructure damage, if you're putting things down some of the stormwater systems, it can cause damage to it, maybe particularly corrosive chemicals and things like that. And you can end up with contaminated streams, rivers, and coastal waters. Our two main concerns of stormwater, we need to look at flood control and water supply. This is the volume and timing of our runoff water. So kind of like the water management district, we need to be careful with the flooding and how much water we have in the end left after we send this all off of the land. We also need to be concerned about the potential contaminants. This is the water pollution that the water is carrying. Like I said, this could be chemicals, this could be nutrients, this could be fecal material. Any of these things count as the potential contaminants. Stormwater pollution, here's kind of like an overall thing that you could find in the water. All sorts of metals. And again, this depends on where it's coming from. Organic chemicals, pesticides, oil, gasoline, pathogens, viruses, bacteria, protozoans. We need to be concerned about the oxygen demand, and this is usually caused by a lot of these organic materials. You think, clipping grass, leaves that fall into it, human and animal waste, but it's because of giving these things, the nutrients, the organic material to the bacteria, and the bacteria break it down, and in this process, it causes a demand for oxygen. Sediment, of course, is like the turbidity I was telling you about, sand, silt, other particles that increases the turbidity or the cloudiness of the water. Certain salts, if you have an overabundance of salts, that is also not good. And then, of course, nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus are usually the biggest ones that we are concerned about in South Florida. So some of these sources, overall nutrient and sediment sources, you can see starting in the left corner, we have wastewater treatment plants and agriculture, which definitely contributes more toward the nutrient parts, depending on the sort of agriculture, like if we're talking about some of the animal farming organizations, that may also contribute fecal bacteria. Some of our industrial factories and things like that. From that side, you see the surface runoff. So it runs off from the top. We have a base flow of groundwater. With all of these things that occur, they all contribute to what we have. So they contribute to the groundwater, the rain falls down and washes all these things out from all these places, and it causes the stormwater to take this all with it. Some of the nutrient pollution, again, as I said, phosphorus and nitrogen are the common causes. Blue-green algae is a definite concern because once you feed bacteria, this algae is not, when you call it blue-green algae, it's not actually algae. It is a form of bacteria called cyanobacteria, cyano meaning blue-green. So once it gets nutrients, you get a huge bloom. So you have brown algae, which also benefits from this, but it's simply a different form. It is not bacteria. This is an actual algae, but you give them nutrients and they are able to take the nutrients and metabolize them and increase the number of cells that are present, which causes our blooms. Some of the most common pollutant is sediment. It comes from soil erosion, construction sites, which is definitely, there's a whole section on the NIPD's program where you have to be very careful with your construction sites and how you manage the flow of water and sediment off of your sites. There are all sorts of silt fences and silt traps and everything you're supposed to be using. Also, you want to be sure that you are careful with the decomposition of plants. Sediment in suspension can make the streams and lakes cloudy or turbid. Pollution from automobiles is also something that we may not think about, but it does contribute to stormwater. Nearly 200 million gallons of oil are improperly disposed each year. Maybe people doing a home oil change and they don't properly dispose of it. There are places where you can take it to some of the waste facilities and they will help you dispose of it properly. 1 quart of oil can contain 1 million gallons of water. If you wash your car in your driveway, polluted water also flows to the storm drain. And these pollutants, you may not think of them as pollutants, but the things that wash off your car, the soap, the detergent, any salt or rust, motor oils, other fluids that you're washing off of a car, it is going into the stormwater system. Our septic systems, I'm sure you've heard a lot about septic systems. The EPA estimates that 25% of homes use septic systems. There are over 4 billion gallons of wastewater per day that is dispersed below the ground through septic systems. That's a lot to think about, especially depending on the areas in which we live, where if you have very shallow septic systems, and we may have that here in some of our local counties, Martin, St. Lucie, even on down to Dade and Broward, we have this concern where the septic systems can become inundated when floods occur. So you may have one that functions normally, but during a rainy period or a flood problem, then your septic system may then go under. So there's some of those where they're trying to look into it and determine whether or not there are some that are continuously flooded out and need to be replaced and hopefully move on to connections to sewer. We also need to be concerned about lawn chemical pollution. And these are things, like I said, we may not think about it. We think we're helping the plants. Fertilizers, herbicides, insecticides, trying to get rid of weeds that we don't want, trying to fertilize the plants that we do want, trying to get rid of pests, insects that might be chewing on our plants. But excessive application can cause toxic levels of chemicals and high levels of nutrient runoff. When you're using some of these, there are specific rules, instructions on the labels that you can follow. We also, of course, have fertilizer ordinances, and they can help you have a guideline as to how much you should actually be using for your size of your lawn and how many times a year you should apply it. So this way you can be careful to not excessively apply any of these things. Of course, pet waste. Now, since a lot of my work has been in fecal indicator bacteria, I am particularly concerned about pet waste because there are, dog parks, there are beaches where you're allowed to bring your dog. People sometimes they don't want to bring the dog bag, so they don't want to pick them up, or they don't want to use it, or you just pack it up in a dog bag anyway and then throw it somewhere. And I see that all of the time. The problem is that during every rain or flood event, thousands of pounds of pet waste flows into local streams. A single gram of dog waste. This is a study from 2009 that points out that we have a single gram of dog waste contains on average 39 million colony forming units. A colony forming unit is the very basic measurement when you look at something like the Florida Healthy Beaches program and they determine whether or not a beach should remain open or they issue an advisory. They're going to issue an advisory based on the number of CFUs, which is if you filter 100 milligrams of water 100 milliliters of water through a filter and you incubate it, they count the specific number of colony forming units, and those colony forming units tell them whether or not the beach should remain open. The poor water quality cutoff is 70 CFUs. So dog waste is certainly contributing a lot, which is why it's very helpful if people pick up their dog waste. Litter and trash, of course, we always unfortunately seem to have that. That always seems to be a concern. Anything that is thrown in the street can be picked up by stormwater. And we get rain events, we get flooding, we get hurricanes, everything is picked up and carried along. And cigarettes tend to be a number one item that gets taken along by this. This kind of illustrates this on this first flush slide. It shows the total suspended solids. It shows the biological oxygen, biochemical oxygen demand, and the chemical oxygen demand. But what first flush really indicates is, say that you have dry season, which we're currently in. We don't see a lot of rain. Once wet season begins, which is usually in May, all of a sudden we'll get like a big rain to kick it off. This giant rain will come and will flood the streets. Everything that's been stored on the land, in the soil for all those number of months when we didn't get rain is going to be flushed out. So you will have all of the cigarette butts we were talking about, all of the dog waste, all of the suspended solids, all the nutrients, all of the pesticides and herbicides. That's been sitting there and it hasn't been transported. But at this first flush, and sometimes this can last for days on that first rain, you know, it floods and it carries it all with it. So first flush is important for many different sorts of pollution issues. Another thing that affects us is looking at pervious and impervious surfaces. The pervious surfaces are the ones that allow for water to drain through. When we're working on certain sorts of construction, we do try to use this. Impervious surfaces are asphalt and concrete, and those are the ones that tend to flood and allow water to pool and collect. And you see there's a little picture of pervious surfaces, which allow the water to drain through. The effects of imperviousness on runoff, as I was sort of discussing, if you look at natural ground cover, you can see that once rain falls on it, you get 40% what they call evapotranspiration. It evaporates into the environment, used by plants as well. Some of it becomes shallow infiltration, some of it goes deep inside toward groundwater, and 10% of it runs off. When you look at an impervious surface, 10 to 20%, you get a little bit less of all these things, the less shallow infiltration, less deep infiltration, less evapotranspiration, and more runoff, 20% runoff. You increase this to 35 to 50%, and you see we now have about 30% runoff, 20% shallow infiltration, 15% deep. We have less going to our groundwater. If you have 75 to 100% imperviousness, there's barely any going to groundwater, 5% deep infiltration, 10% shallow, 30% is evapotranspiring, and 55% runoff going off the surfaces and going into rivers, oceans. And this is basically the flow of pollution. With these rain or flooding events, pollutants are picked up by flowing water, because that doesn't matter whether we're talking about herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers that are sitting on the grass currently, grass clippings, fecal bacteria, dog waste, trash, it all gets picked up. They're all carried into the storm drain. Some of them, they go through the stormwater conveyance system, and then this stormwater conveyance system discharges to our water bodies. And this is how we get our pollution. Some approaches we can use to pollution reduction is these are practices or methods to prevent or reduce, slow, or remove stormwater runoff contaminants before reaching the receiving waters. These are called BMPs. They're best management practices, and they're a series of direct recommendations that you can do. That there's also ones that cities need to follow, municipalities can follow, but there's also the ones that people, individuals can do at their own homes. These are based on research, evaluation, and some educated assumptions based on what we know. We're trying to use the best knowledge available. So sometimes recommendations might change or evolve over time as we learn more. What we're trying to do overall, there's a concern called the total maximum daily load. These establish the water quality goals to restore the health of a lake, river, stream, spring, or estuary. And this tells you the maximum load that should be allowed of something. It can be the fecal bacteria, it can be total nitrogen, phosphorus, dissolved oxygen. There's a certain limit as to what can go into these water bodies. And we try to make sure that what we do with our BMPs is make it so that we're reaching these TMDLs. We're not going over this allowed maximum daily load. In Martin County, we have 9 water bodies that are currently impaired for nutrients, total nitrogen, total phosphorus, and the oxygen demand. What we're trying to do is get it down to these numbers listed here, the 0.7 milligrams per liter for total phosphorus. You see it's much less. That's because we have a lot of phosphorus available. We have a lot of karst topography, limestone sorts of things. Once you get phosphorus into an environment with algae, that's one of the first things they want to use. So they will also use nitrogen, but they'll go for the phosphorus first. And then the levels for biological oxygen demand as well. The TMDLs are driven by our Basin Management Action Plan. So these plans help us. They are informing us of strategies necessary to achieve TMDLs. Basically, it's an action plan. It identifies what actions we need to do to achieve TMDLs. And it also points out in this action plan who is responsible for implementing those actions. So this action plan that we have here for the St. Lucie River and estuary, it was adopted in 2013. You can see we have 6 subbasins that we are concerned with. And we have separate entities that handle things a bit differently. Their pollution loads are different. So they're kind of set out specifically so that we're aware of what types of pollution are being contributed. So there are things like agriculture and the county itself as an entity, the city itself, our water control districts, things like that, community development districts, to look at what these different responsibilities are. This is a total acreage, as you see, of 514,646 acres. This is some of the accomplishments that we've done in the working on these. Overall, Martin County has over 20 years constructing stormwater and water quality improvement projects. We have completed 42 stormwater treatment projects. These include hybrid wetland treatment technology projects, reservoirs, water quality retrofits, and improvement projects. We have 7 new stormwater treatment areas that are in planning and design phases. We have reduced over 70,000 pounds of total nitrogen per year and over 15,000 pounds of total phosphorus from entering the St. Lucie River and the estuary. These are through our water quality projects. More than 15,000 acres within the St. Lucie River watershed are now treated prior to discharge to creeks and to rivers. Those are some of the BMPs that we're able to put in some of these areas so that it can flow through there and to be able to be treated as much as we can treat so we can release some cleaner, less polluted water to the creeks and to the rivers. We have a fertilizer ordinance. We are working on the completion of nearly 3,500 septic to sewers. So we're trying to get all of these people off of septic and into sewer. Another 4,000 are underway, and we're planning to have an additional 3,000. We're extending sewer service to more than 2,000 residential properties and have gotten rid of 70 packaged wastewater treatment plants. These are they're determined to be a threat because they're small wastewater treatment facilities. They're not the big wastewater treatment plant with things like best available treatment or advanced wastewater treatment. They're kind of something that was used, they're smaller and they can't handle things on the scale, and they also don't have the technology that one would need to actually treat to the standards that we now know are available. We have also got numerous resolutions adopted to support the St. Lucie River and water quality initiatives. This, I know, is very hard to look at. There are very small print here, but it's just some of the projects that Martin County has done to improve water quality. A lot of these, you can see the project type. I've broken them into, so you can see which are stormwater. There's some wastewater ones as well. As we mentioned, the septic to sewer conversions is definitely one of those. You notice that it's a phase out of septic tanks. There's street sweeping, baffle box cleanouts, exfiltration trenches, things like that, where you can do basic BMPs such as the street sweeping. Education programs are also one of these that we can work on. There's also ones like the C44 reservoir projects that are on that is underway. So we're working on all of these projects that we hope will increase the water quality, increase treatment, and improve our water quality in Martin County. Some of our future projects, we are looking at Golden Gate and Manatee Pocket, Coral Gardens, Map Creek, Old Palm City. A lot of these are our septic to sewer conversion projects. So we are targeting these areas so that we can send cleaner water from these areas into the estuary. Another future project we're thinking of looking at is a channel enhancement. What a lot of this would do is to take what we may currently have, straight flowing canals, and make them more like a natural channel design, forested banks, some sorts of being able to rehydrate wetland floodplains to enhance the services, just so that it's has a little more time to move through the system. It is supposed to be filtered by the soil. So if you can filter water through the soil and give it more time, it can have a better chance to have some of the pollutants removed and not carried into the water as it flows. What do you do? What can you do if you see possible pollution? You can take photographs of what you observe, or you can report the suspected illicit discharge or pollution to our stormwater hotline. These illicit discharges or pollution can be anything, like we listed here. Some of the trash that you might see, or it might not even be litter, but that you can see is something that would be large. Some of it is if you see open drums in the woods somewhere, rusting, not protected from the rain, chemicals that are not covered. If you know that there's a connection, a pipe that doesn't necessarily belong there, that somebody added a connection to stormwater, if it's a septic, all sorts of things that don't necessarily belong, you can take pictures of that and you can call the Stormwater hotline. Stormwater hotline does lead you to our field operations. So you will be able to talk to someone from Martin County who will enter this into our system. These things that you send, if you send them by email or you send this, if you do a phone call, they do get entered into a request for service system. And from there, we are able to take the things that you make, the reports that you make, and we can take some action on it. And we're able to go out and inspect it. If you leave your information, you do not have to, but if you leave your information, we might be able to stay in contact with you, to get back with you, to update you and let you know what's happened with it. If you have questions or if we have questions, then we're able to communicate and see if what you have reported or what you've noticed, if it's gotten any better, or if you have additional details to add to your report. Things that you should not do, because sometimes I know that we want to help and we want to do our best and we want to do good things for our environment. Do not try to clean this up yourself. Some of these pollution things that you're going to see, they could be chemically dangerous. You'll notice this by they might smell funny. They might, if they have an odor, if you feel unusual heat coming off of it, if there's a lot of dead fish or dead wildlife, don't clean it up yourself. There's so many reasons. We use PPE to clean this up. We wear personal protection. These are waders and gloves and boots. So do not clean these things up yourself. Do not take samples of it for us. When I know, again, there's a natural urge to help and people want to be like, oh, but I have it. I have exactly what it is. You can analyze it. You can take it to the lab. Yes, we do have labs, and yes, we do work with them and we are able to do that. But it would be better if you just were able to take a picture. Do not take the samples or physical evidence. We don't need to have the drums, that you found in the woods or the abandoned oil cans or anything. A picture will be fine. Also, do not confront the possible polluters. That can really be concerning if you work with someone, you're dealing with someone who doesn't necessarily want to be caught for what they did. They don't want to be confronted. It's safer for you to simply report what you've seen and to let us take care of it. So I want to thank you for your time and your attention and your interest in our local water quality. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thank you everyone for joining us. I am going to stop sharing real quick, and I'm going to put up an evaluation poll. So if you guys can just help out and complete that. And I am also going to take the opportunity to put up the field trip QR code one more time. You can just use your phone and snap that link and register in real time. And in the meantime, we'll put those questions in the chat. No questions right now, just some excitement and thank yous. And yes, Nick, hopefully you'll join us on the field trip too. I did notice someone already registered, so I'm really excited about that.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm also very glad to see that there aren't a lot of questions, because I definitely tried to make sure some of these things are kind of difficult to understand, why we can't do this or why we can't, do other things. And I hope to lay it out pretty conveniently so that we know.
we do have one question.
Hey.
Casey asks, are long linear STAs a possibility for channel enhancements?
That would depend on the specific environment, and that's what we generally try to do, is to tailor our STAs to what the area that we're working with. That could be a possibility. It kind of would depend. And obviously things like the STAs and um, some of the other treatments that we're using, we're always looking at them and modifying them and evaluating for how exactly they're functioning. So I certainly, wouldn't rule that out. But that's, yeah, it's not currently how we do it. I can't imagine why, if it worked for a specific environment, why we might not want to try something that works.
Great. We'll wait a couple more minutes just to see if there's any last minute questions coming in. If not, we hope you all will join us next week, learn about rain barrels and how you can capture and conserve water at the home. And thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you again, Elizabeth. Oh, we do have another question. What can be done about the increased development of homes in Martin County?
Ooh, that's a different one and a little unrelated. So it's kind of hard to explain the increased development. Probably what we can do from a stormwater standpoint is that if we learn what we can do individually, what BMPs for the home can be, what you can do at your home. The rain barrel is certainly, one idea of something that you can do. Being careful about how you wash your car, being careful of how you keep your trash, being careful about any animals that you have. Basically, what you can do individually and what we can do is to use BMPs the best that we possibly can. So we try, as developments increase in the county, we try to balance that to evaluate water quality and see if there's any increases that we need to be doing, any other projects we need to build. So we're keeping an eye on that at the county, but on the individual level, I mean, there's the things that you can do with being careful how you use your fertilizer, housekeeping stuff, I suppose, basically is the best way to look at that.
Okay, next question is, there's two separate questions. So the first one is, there are so many animals that are getting cancer. Are there any efforts to restrict home use of Roundup?
I don't think there's currently any efforts to do that. On many levels, people are looking into that, agencies are looking into that. It's definitely something being evaluated. I don't think that it will be restricted at this time, but that would depend more on what recommendations come from the EPA. And that's a lot of what we need to look at, is what the EPA recommends. And from there, I mean, they have done a lot of studies on these other areas where they are able to make restrictions. So that's what I would be looking for, to see if they make that recommendation. I think if it were me myself, I would probably not be using Roundup, but I tend to xeriscape more anyway. So using native plants, things like that, I think is a better use of land, of your yard, than anything. But that would simply be my recommendation.
Okay, our next two questions are about sewer connection. So the first one is, when can businesses in Coral Gardens hook up to sewers?
I don't know that I have a specific timeline for that. Like I said, Coral Gardens is one of the areas that we are working on, and it is in the plans. So I think once they get that closer, they do send out the notifications that you're able to hook up. I know they're focusing mostly on, I believe, residences at this time. I would need to maybe go back and talk to utilities to get a specific answer to that, but I don't have the timeline for that. I just
Yeah.
know it's coming.
And we've had the utilities group come present a couple times. I think their program is Connect to Protect.
Yes.
So you can look up their website and they might have some more information available there. And the next question is, do you know if there are any plans to offer sewer connection to homeowners in Hobe Sound who are located near the Indian River Lagoon?
I would say that that's definitely something we're looking at. There's definitely issues with some septic tanks and some flooding. So I know we're looking into that. I don't know any, again, timelines for that, but we are definitely always looking into trying to convert as many septics as we can. So I would say we're definitely looking into that, but there is no timeline as far as I know for that.
Okay, and do you know how much it costs residents to hook up to sewer?
I think, like you pointed out, the Connect to Protect would probably have better information on that. So I'm not sure of the specific fee that would be. You can also, I believe there are programs that help you to get some grants and get some assistance for this. So I would definitely look to Connect to Protect for that.
Yeah, and Jennifer, I believe they, the utilities folks who run the septic to sewer conversion projects gave a presentation last year. So you might want to refer back to the recordings, and that some of that information might be there as well as their contact information.
Sure.
So, all right, well, I want to thank you all again for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you next week for Rain Barrels. And thank you, Elizabeth, and welcome to the Water Ambassador Program.
Thank you.
So excited to be working with you.
Yes, I'm definitely excited to be working with you and with Vincent and with everyone.
Yes. Yep, Vincent says that the Connect to Protect recording is on the same web page that's in the chat, so you can refer to that, or just Google Martin County Sea Grant. There is a quote. Someone says that last year they were quoted about just under $17,000 per resident, so that is expensive. But again, refer back to the website or to the webinar for more information. Okay, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.